Chapter 35, in which a lady finds solace in familiar surroundings and a mother's unspoken wisdom. The Car Hill Expressway lifted Carrie above the city, granting her a god's-eye view of Sydney Cove. The Opera House gleamed white against the blue water, its sails reaching for the cloudless sky. The harbour bridge arched its back like a great steel cat stretching in the sun. And there, nestled against the terminal, the Queen Elizabeth waited for her next journey, her hull pristine against the bustling crowds of new passengers. For a few hundred metres, Carrie had a perfect panoramic view of the scene she'd photographed only 6 days ago. The difference was stark. Then, she'd been on the outside looking in, capturing a vessel of mystery and possibility. Now she looked down from above, seeing the whole picture with devastating clarity. Her story on the ship was over. Others were now beginning. She could make out the distinct groups on the dock. Excited first-timers with their enormous luggage, seasoned cruisers moving with efficiency, crew members returning from brief shore leave. From this height, they looked like figures in a living diorama, a perfect composition she could frame but no longer feel. The car climbed higher, joining the flow of traffic onto the harbour bridge. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as the view disappeared, replaced by steel girders and the endless stream of vehicles. Crossing the harbour felt symbolic, a tangible separation from the world she'd briefly inhabited. The northern suburbs slid past her window. Streets she'd driven countless times suddenly seemed alien in their ordinariness. A billboard for a new apartment complex, a cafe where locals queued for coffee, a child riding a scooter along the footpath. The everyday world ticked on, completely oblivious to the fact that her own world had been hollowed out. The car was too quiet. The familiar rattle of her Polo's engine seemed unnaturally loud without his voice filling the space, without his laugh cutting through the silence. She reached for the radio, then withdrew her hand. The quiet was painful, but she wasn't ready to replace it. At a traffic light in Mossman, a radio jingle for a furniture sale blared from the car beside hers. The jaunty tune felt so jarringly trivial that Carrie nearly laughed. How could anything be so ordinary when everything had changed? The Polo turned into her steep driveway in Balgala Heights almost on its own, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had abandoned her. Bronwyn's Toyota still sat in its spot, a reassuring sign of the orderly handover to come. Carrie sat for a moment after turning off the ignition, letting the ticking of the cooling engine be the only sound. In her hands, the familiar shape of her steering wheel felt wrong somehow. She'd been holding it one moment, his hand the next, and now just leather and plastic again. Before her, the front door of the cottage looked both welcoming and confining, the entrance to a life that was simultaneously her greatest love and her heaviest burden. The word came to her unbidden. Cage. That's what they'd talked about, she and Crispin, their shared confinement, the lives they'd constructed from duty and love that now held them as surely as any iron bars. She closed her eyes and imagined him already at 35,000 feet, trapped in his own small metal tube, flying toward a different cage. She took a deep breath and got out, retrieving her camera bag and overnight duffel from the boot. Inside, she found Bronwyn and her mother in the living room. Rowena sat in her wheelchair by the large windows that offered a glimpse of the distant harbour, while Bronwyn folded laundry with efficient movements. They both looked up as Carrie entered, their faces lighting with welcome.
"There she is."
Rowena's voice was warm and bright.
"Our wanderer returns."
"Hi, Mum." Carrie leaned down to kiss her mother's cheek, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender soap and face powder. "Been good?"
"Bronwyn has spoiled me rotten,"
Rowena said, her eyes twinkling.
"I've been treated like the Queen herself."
"Hardly,"
Bronwyn replied with a smile.
"though we did have a proper high tea yesterday. Cucumber sandwiches, scones, the works."
"She even found my old silver teapot,"
Rowena added.
"the one your grandmother gave us."
Carrie felt a wave of gratitude washing over her exhaustion. "Thank you, Bronwyn, for everything,"
"Only doing my job."
Bronwyn said. But her eyes were kind, lingering on Carrie's face a beat longer than necessary.
Now let me give you the rundown before I head off.
The handover was quick and efficient. Bronwyn went through the medication schedule, noting that the pain medication had been particularly effective when given with yogurt at breakfast rather than with water. She mentioned that Rowena had been sleeping well, but had experienced some leg cramps in the night, easily soothed with gentle massage. She'd kept a detailed log of meals, bathroom visits, and mood changes, all reassuringly normal.
Oh, and the physiotherapist called to reschedule next Tuesday's appointment.
Bronwyn added, handing Carrie a note with the new time.
I wrote it all down.
You've thought of everything, Carrie said. Bronwyn gathered her things, and Carrie walked her to the door. Thank you, Carrie said again, aware of how inadequate the words felt. Mum seems so well,
She's a lovely woman.
Bronwyn replied.
You're lucky to have each other.
She hesitated, then added gently,
And I put fresh sheets on your bed. Thought you might appreciate that after being away.
The simple kindness was so unexpected it made her throat ache. That's really thoughtful. Bronwyn squeezed her arm.
Get some rest. You look like you've had quite a journey.
There was something in her eyes, a quiet knowing that made Carrie wonder if her face revealed more than she intended. After Bronwyn left, Carrie carried her bags to her office. The small room was immaculate, the single bed made up with fresh linens, her desk tidied, even her photography equipment arranged more neatly than she usually managed herself. The cramped space that had felt like a downgrade from her former bedroom now looked different. Not spacious, certainly, but with a sense of possibility she'd never noticed before. She unzipped her duffel bag and began unpacking. T-shirts, jeans, toiletries, the ordinary detritus of travel. Then her hands touched something sleek and cool. She drew out the formal dress she'd worn to dinner with Crispin. The fabric still held the ghost of that night. Not just the pressure of his hand at the small of her back, or the brush of his fingers against hers as they'd left the dining room, but the weight of his gaze when she'd first appeared in the Princess Grill lounge. The memory was so vivid she gasped, a physical jolt that made her clutch the dress more tightly. She hung the dress carefully, her hand smoothing the satin as if preserving a fragile photograph. She returned to the living room to find her mother gazing out at the harbour, a gentle smile on her lips that didn't quite reach her perceptive, waiting eyes.
So,
Rowena said, turning to her.
tell me everything. How was Lucy? Did you enjoy the speakers? Did you meet anyone interesting?
Carrie settled into the chair opposite, buying time with a deep breath. Lucy was good until she fell and cracked her ribs. She couldn't come aboard in Sydney, but she was at the terminal when we got back this morning.
Oh no, poor dear. Is she all right?
She's fine. Sore but fine she's bringing lunch tomorrow.
That will be lovely.
Rowena's eyes remained fixed on Carrie's face, reading each subtle shift of expression.
And the literary events? Were they as good as you hoped?
Carrie began to talk, carefully selecting which pieces of the cruise to share. She described Alexander McCall Smith's humorous anecdotes, the beauty of the Tasmanian coastline, the elegance of the formal dinner. She mentioned the surprising quality of the food, the charm of her dinner companions, the tranquility of the cabin's balcony. She did not mention a quiet chart room with a tweed-jacketed speaker. She did not mention Great Oyster Bay under the stars. She did not mention a hand laced through hers on a British Airways flight day. But as she spoke, she was aware of her mother's gaze on her, not just listening to the stories, but mapping the emotional geography of her face. Rowena had always been able to read her, even when Carrie thought she was being opaque.
And did you meet anyone special?
Rowena asked quietly when Carrie paused. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Carrie looked into her mother's eyes and saw not curiosity, but compassion. Rowena's gaze was soft but sharp, tracing the new lines of experience around her daughter's eyes, reading not the details of a trip, but the map of an emotional journey. Yes, she admitted simply, but it couldn't. Rowena reached across and took Carrie's hand in her frail one.
Some people come into our lives to show us something about ourselves, darling. That doesn't make the connection any less real.
Carrie looked down at her own hand in her mother's, still feeling the lingering warmth of Crispin's touch against her skin. Then back at her mother's weathered fingers. She squeezed her mother's hand, grateful beyond words for the wisdom that required no details, no explanations. They spent the late afternoon quietly together. Carrie made a simple dinner of pasta with vegetables from the fridge, the familiar routine anchoring her back into her life. As she stirred the sauce, a flicker of imagination caught her off guard. Was he eating an airline meal now? Had he chosen the chicken or the beef? Would he be thinking of their dinner at the steakhouse as he picked at his tray? Or would he be flying business or even first, stretching out and bantering with the attendant over the champagne? The grief clawed at her again, swift and fierce, before subsiding to a manageable hum. As evening drew in, Carrie remembered the message she'd sent her mother before disembarking. The Queen Elizabeth would sail past their cottage around 6 o'clock. She checked her watch, just enough time. "Would you like to come out on the deck to see the ship?" she asked Rowena, who was finishing her tea. Her mother shook her head.
No, love, I think I'll turn in early, but you go. Take some pictures for me.
Carrie kissed her mother goodnight, helped her with her evening routine, and then stepped out onto the small deck as twilight was thickening into night. The air was cool against her face, carrying the salt tang of the ocean. Below, the lights of Manly glittered, and further out, the dark expanse of the Pacific stretched to the horizon. She brought her camera with the zoom lens, adjusting the settings for the low light. The sky was a deep, velvety indigo, pierced by the first stars of evening. She scanned the eastern horizon, waiting. Then she saw it. Suddenly, dramatically, the Queen Elizabeth appeared from behind the mansion to her right, the great ship emerging like an illuminated city. Through her viewfinder, the vessel was a constellation of light moving slowly against the darkening sea, her silhouette immediately recognizable even at this distance. Carrie could make out the details, the sweep of decks, the illuminated windows, the distinctive red funnel now lit by floodlights. She watched as the ship sailed majestically toward the heads, the exact reverse of the view she'd had that morning. The vessel's reflection rippled on the black water. Somewhere on that ship, new stories were already unfolding, new connections being made, new memories taking shape. And somewhere out there, across the ocean and half a world away, Crispin would soon be landing, returning to his life, to his family, to the cage of duty he'd built himself. She raised her camera to capture the ship, but something made her hesitate. A single photograph suddenly felt inadequate, too limited a frame for what the ship represented. One image couldn't possibly contain the richness of what had happened, the complexity of what she felt. It was bigger than a moment. It was a narrative with a beginning, middle, and unfolding end. A thought, sharp and clear as a camera click, formed in her mind. This isn't a shot. It's a story. She watched until the last light of the ship disappeared into the vast darkness beyond the heads. Then she turned away from the empty sea and went back inside. In her office, she sat at her desk, the small lamp casting a warm pool of light. The cramped room that had once felt like a prison now felt different, like a studio, a place where stories could be made, not just recorded. She opened her laptop. Her finger hovered over the icon for her photo editing software, the familiar gateway to her work. Then, deliberately, she moved the cursor and opened a blank document instead. Her fingers found the keys. It wasn't a photograph to be captured, but a story to be built, word by word. Not her story, not exactly. She needed distance, perspective. She needed the freedom that fiction would give her. The cursor blinked, a steady pulse, waiting, and she began.